So first of all, it says determine the phase shift if you had y equals cos of x minus pi over 6. Which way is that going? Left or right? Pi over 6 to the right. Remember, everything that was inside our function was sort of always the opposite, left and right. If you had a negative, you went right. If you had a b value, you multiplied by the reciprocal. And so it says sketch the graphs of cos x and cos of x minus pi over 6. And I'm going to do those two on two separate graphs here. So our cos graph, normal cos graph, has a period of 2 pi, split it into 4 equal sections. Pi over 2 pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. It goes from -1 to 1. And our cos graph starts at a maximum, then to your center line, then your minimum, then your center line, back to your maximum. There's our cos graph. For showing the phase shift, I'm going to keep those values that I have, and now I'm going to think, with my use of fractions and understanding of fractions, where would pi over 6 be? Because I need to go pi over 6 to the right. I'm going to mark it in on purple here. First of all, in what quadrant is pi over 6? Quadrant 1, so it should be somewhere in here. You could think of your unit circle. Pi over 6 is 30 degrees. Pi over 2 is 90 degrees. Does it make sense to do a third for pi over 6? Can you see if you multiplied pi over 2 by a third, you would get pi over 6. So what's going to happen now is we need to shift each of these 5 points pi over 6 to the right. So I'm going to take and shift here. I'm going to draw a line here, pi over 6 to the right, there pi over 6 to the right, there pi over 6 to the right, there pi over 6 to the right. My maximum is still going to be 1, and minimum -1. But now, since I've shifted everything pi over 6 to the right, my maximum's here at pi over 6. My center line is at this one. My minimum at this one, back to the center line, back to my maximum. And we've taken our original graph and shifted it pi over 6 to the right. And now on this question, if they were being really, really fussy, I would lose a half a mark. Okay? I sketched cos. I sketched pi over 6 to the right. Again, it's good practice to go back and read your question in case you missed anything. Sketch the graphs of y equals cos x and y equals cos x minus 6 for 0 less than x less than 2 pi. What is that? Or, sorry, 0 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 2 pi. What does that mean? That means the graph is supposed to have stopped at 2 pi. No arrowhead on the end there. And it's supposed to have stopped at 0. So I'm going to just erase a little bit there, or scribble it out. For here, now I would have to erase this part, and 2 pi would go up to there. Now on your final exam, they're nicer. Often they'll say graph for at least one period. So if you stopped it from 0 to 2 pi, you'd be fine. If you put arrowheads on the end, you're fine. So they're nicer this way. But in this one, because it said the domain needed to go just from 0 to 2 pi, technically, we wouldn't have it right if we had the arrowheads on it. And it would be an E9 error for adding arrowheads when we didn't need to. So you get an E9 if you forget arrowheads, and an E9 if you add arrowheads when you're not supposed to. Whew. So again, how important is it to reread a question just to verify that everything is there? Okay, questions for practice on this one? Are 3, E, and F.